Hi students, and welcome to this special edition webinar on people styles at work, making bad relationships good and good relationships better. This is the first part. This is part one. There will be a secondary video which we'll take on to the end of this one. This is based off the book, also with the same title and subtitle, People Styles at Work, Making Bad Relationships Good and Good Relationships Better, by Dr. Robert Bolton and Dorothy Grover Bolton. So I've taken that information and adapted it for this webinar for you guys today. So thanks for joining us. Success at work and happiness in life depend in large measure on your ability to relate well to others. Chances are that anyone who can relate well and more effectively with others can find more enjoyable working environments. By the end of this session, you'll have information and knowledge about your own working behavioral style, other styles, and also how to maximize your working relationships, minimizing conflict and interpersonal issues in the workplace, and how to provide a more fulfilling experience at work, giving you a valuable edge as well. Remember, other people are important to our success. Those that can relate well to others generally have a more rewarding working experience. We have moved from an industrial age to an age of service. No matter what we do, at some point we do need to be able to relate well to other people. Problems can be opportunities in disguise. Although it's challenging to work with somebody different from yourself, you can make those differences work for you and not against you. We can't be outstanding at everything. You need to be able to supplement your skills with those who have other skills which are different from yours. As you develop the ability to work and relate well to others, you develop a valuable skill, making you more versatile and able to contribute within a team, groups, and a better rounded, stronger performer in your workplace. Sometimes those people that you clash with in the workplace actually hold the key to your success. So just to reiterate, by the end of this session, you'll have some information and knowledge about your own working behavioral style, other styles, and also how to maximize your working relationships, minimizing conflict and interpersonal issues in the workplace, providing a more fulfilling experience at work and giving you a valuable edge. Firstly, students, you might be familiar with the Myers-Briggs model. It's a work which is based off Carl Jung, who's one of the towering figures of modern psychology, work on personality types. It's a well-taught and discussed tool to help individuals understand themselves a little bit better. And I do suggest for students to have a look at the Myers-Briggs Jungian personality typologies. Now they actually focus on inner states. It focuses on your inner state rather than on your outer behavior. So it actually makes it very, very difficult to identify other people's personality styles. Now, Dr. David Merrill, a psychologist, developed an approach that focused on differences between people's outer states or behaviors, focusing on visible behaviors rather than the differences between people's inner states. And hence, social styles or people styles, social styles as it was known at the time, was born. Merrill's types are far more applicable in a modern working environment when trying to relate and read another personality's personality type because of the ability to make observances on behaviors. So as mentioned, it only focuses on the outer states, on the visible behaviors. Merrill's work is easy to work with. There are only 4 styles rather than the 16 personality styles that you find in Jungian's work. A little note about these styles. No style is better or worse than another style. Each style has strengths and weaknesses not shared by other styles. Our population is equally divided amongst these styles. People of all styles are and can be successful. Research has proved that there isn't one style more successful than another. Behavior patterns in one style tend to trigger stress in the other 3 styles. No wonder we have people problems. There will always be unwanted friction between people. People problems can seriously undermine morale and productivity. We talk about task versus maintenance, and task being everything that relates to completing a particular job, maintenance being all of the jobs in and around maintaining a relationship. As difficult as task problems may be, most of us would generally prefer to have them over people problems or maintenance problems. Usually a task problem is including a person in it. Using the Merrill approach to splitting people up into the 4 different styles, which we'll observe here, we are significantly different than 75% of the population in the way that we behave. These people that are in the other 3 boxes are very important to our success. Remember, we are all in the minority with the way that we behave. So what are people differences? Well, people think differently, they decide differently, people use time in different ways, people work at a different pace, people communicate very differently, they handle emotions very differently, they manage stress differently. People also deal with conflicting opinions differently. This leads to people who are different have a harder time building rapport. Miscommunication happen more often. Are less likely to be persuasive with people are less likely to be persuasive with one another. Rubbing each other the wrong way by being themselves. It can also lead to less productivity and increased stress and anxiety. Human behavior, for the most part, isn't as random as it would seem. People are actually more predictable than you think. Psychologist Arnold Mandel carefully observed NFL football players. He found that certain behaviors were strongly linked to other quite different characteristics. He got to the point where he could predict the position that players played on the field based off the way that their locker looked like. A clean locker, he would assume, would refer to an offensive player, somebody who played in the forward line, who liked structures and discipline, enjoyed repetitious practice of well-designed plays, and was rather conservative. A messy locker, he assumed, and usually correctly, was a defensive player, one who disliked structure, was liable to challenge the rules and regulations, and more difficult to manage than his counterparts on the offensive team. Now, what is your style? Your style is not based on how you see yourself, rather on how others observe you. Now, students, I have sent you a copy of the inventory. There's a set of questions. I'm going to open that up for you. Let's see if I can find that. There are a set of questions which I have sent to you guys. Just answer those questions in order to work out what your style is. I'd like you guys to do that before you continue watching. So if you're up to this part of the video and you haven't completed that inventory, please do. Let me just pull it up now, show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, it's this one right here. So you have a series of, I think it's about 18 questions, and it's just A or B. So you answer A or B for each question. And remember, it's best if you can get somebody else, even 2 or 3 other people that you work with, to fill this in on your behalf. If not, answer it as best as you can from the perspective of how others are viewing you. So this is the inventory. Please just complete this. You've got a series of questions, and remember, it's just A on B, A and B, A and B. There are 18 questions, just answer A or B for each. This is about yourself. Now, if you've already completed that and you want to know what it all means, to interpret these answers, the odd numbered questions. So question 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17. If you have answered A's for that question, let me just pull back up the PowerPoint. Okay. If you have answered A's for the odd numbered questions, or mostly A's, you are what we call less assertive. You fall on the left-hand side of the line. If you answered mostly B's for the odd number questions. It refers to a fact that you have a more assertive style. Therefore, you fall on the right-hand side of the line. So, if now the even numbered questions, so question number 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and 18, if your response was mostly A's for the even number question, you are what is known as less responsive. You are what we call above the liners. You'll fall above the line. If you answered mostly B's for the even numbered questions, you are what we call more responsive. You'll fall below the line. So then you need to compare or combine whether you're a left of the line or right of the line, and whether you're an above the line or a below the liner. And that's where we get your style from. Now remember, the genius of this people styles, and these are the 4 styles, guys. That's all the styles that we need to have, that we need to worry about or learn or identify in others. The genius of these people styles or social styles is that it just focuses on 2 dimensions of behavior. You only need to observe 2 classes of behavior to ascertain that person's behavioral style. And the two types are assertiveness and responsiveness. So I'm going to talk about this line here, the assertiveness line. Now, you're either above the assertiveness line or you're below it. Sorry, I beg your pardon. You're either on the left-hand side of this line or you're on the right-hand side of this line. If you're on the right-hand side of assertiveness, it means you are more assertive. If you fall on the left-hand side, it means you are less assertive. So let's talk about what assertiveness means. One's level of assertiveness is the degree to which one's behaviors are seen by others as being forceful or directive. The assertiveness continuum ranges from less to more, but for the purpose of using this tool, we're only interested in whether a person's behavior is more than half the population. We call these the right side of the liners, or the less assertive than half the population, we're calling these people left side of the liners. When we say someone is less or more assertive, we don't mean that he or she is always that way. Some behaviors of a more assertive person can be less directive. More of a person's behavior, however, will fall within a fairly limited area of the continuum. People often think that they move freely along the assertion continuum, but we are creatures of habit, and that is actually rarely the case. For our purposes, we are only looking at behaviors, external behaviors. Therefore, what we observe does not always reflect one's inner drive. Many less assertive people have a very, very strong inner drive, but it's the exterior behavior that may not be seen as forceful or as directive. They get their needs met in a manner that's softer and quieter than that of their behavioral assertive colleagues. The phrase "an iron hand in a velvet glove" can describe the way someone's behavior can mask an underlying strong will and determination. So people that fall right of the line, the more assertive, they exude more energy, they move faster, they gesture more vigorously, they have more intense eye contact, they are erect or lean forward when making a point. They speak more rapidly, they speak louder, they speak more often, address problems quicker, they decide quicker, they are more risk-oriented, they are more confrontational as well. These are the right-siders here. They are more direct and emphatic when expressing opinions, making requests, giving directs. They demonstrate anger faster as well. They exert more pressure for decision or for taking action. The less assertive people, so the left of the liners, demonstrate less energy, move slower, gesture less vigorously, have less intense eye contact, lean backwards even when making a point, speak less rapidly, speak more softly, speak less often, speak slower to address problems, decide less quickly, are less risk-oriented, are less confrontational, are less direct and emphatic when expressing opinions, making requests, and giving directions, and demonstrate anger less quickly. Now let's look at the next area, which is responsiveness. So with responsiveness, you're either above the line or below the line. And what we mean by that is if you're above the line, you're less responsive, and if you're below the line, you're more responsive. Again, for this purpose, we're only interested in the behaviors that are either more or less than half of the population. So one level of responsiveness is the degree to which one is seen by others as showing his or her own emotions or demonstrating awareness of the feelings of others. When we say that people who are emotionally responsive, we don't mean they always let it hang out. There are times where they mute their expressions or feelings too. It's just that they are generally more emotionally demonstrative than the above the aligners. Likewise, people who are emotionally controlled sometimes let their feelings show. Whichever quadrant you fall into refers to the majority of your typical behavior. It's not to say that all behavior is restricted to that space, although as we know, people's behavior for the most part is quite predictable. It's often believed that people who are emotionally controlled simply lack feelings. However, the above the aligners, so the less responsive, these two here, the analyticals and the drivers, can experience very, very, very strong feelings. They are just less likely to display them. Again, for this purpose, we're only focused and interested on behaviors that's visible, that anybody can see. We're not talking about what's happening in the inner states. We're only looking at the outer behaviors. So let's look. The more responsive people, these ones here, the below the liners, they express feelings more openly. They appear friendlier. They are more facially expressive. They gesture more freely. They have more vocal inflections. They're more comfortable with small talk. They use more anecdotes, more stories. They express more concern about human aspects of issues. They prefer working with people. They generally dress more casually. They are less structured in their use of time. The less responsive types are less disclosing of feelings. They appear more reserved. They have less facial expressiveness. They gesture less often. They have less vocal inflections. They are less interested and adept at small talk. They use more facts and logic than anecdotes. They are more task-oriented. They prefer working alone. They dress more formally. And they are more structured with the use of time. So Dr. David Merrill, who's the founding father of these social styles, conducted a study into how each of these key behavioral patterns affected levels of success and found that successful, well-regarded career persons were found in all ranges of the assertiveness and responsiveness scales. This is fortunate as habit patterns related to these crucial dimensions of behavior are deeply ingrained by the time we reach adulthood. Although it is possible to increase or decrease one's emotional expression at times, it's actually extremely difficult to fundamentally change one's characteristic degree of expression of emotion. Assertiveness and responsiveness are the two most important dimensions of a person's behavior. Taken together, these two dimensions create one style or determine one style. So the style names, we need to give these styles some names. To communicate easily about these styles, we need to show these names. So what you're seeing on your screen is the left of the liners and the top of the liners are our analyticals. The left of the liners and the below the liners are the amiables. The right of the liners and above the liners are the drivers. And the right of the liners and the below the liners are the expressives. The analyticals, they tend to be less assertive than half the population, less responsive than half the population. The drivers, they are more assertive than half of the population, but less responsive. The expressives are more assertive and more emotionally responsive than half the population. The amiables, whilst being more responsive than half the population, are less assertive than half the population. Remember, you have a dominant style. In other words, you prefer to relate and work in ways characteristics of one of those styles. Early in life, one style emerged as your favorite, and now you rely mostly on that style. That's what we call your comfort zone or your default style or pattern. Each style has its potential strengths and weaknesses. These strengths are merely potential assets. These tendencies need to be cultivated in order to become actual strengths. Similarly, the weaknesses are merely potential liabilities. Successful persons in each style create ways to prevent these characteristics from undermining their effectiveness. Remember, despite having a dominant style, it's true that we are all four-person style. We are, in fact, a bit of a mix bag. There is no such thing as an absolute analytical. You may see parts of yourself in each style. Just going back to those styles there. This discussion here is merely a method or a model of showcasing the different behaviors that exist. It is done so to give students an idea on how to work with some of the other styles and some tools to improve their working relationships at work. It's not to say that all people in that category do all of these things. We are generalizing, but we're doing so to be able to provide some ideas for students. So number one, you can't change your dominant style. You will be that style for the rest of your life. You will change in other ways, but your dominant style is effectively a fundamental part of who you are. It'll actually persist through your lifetime. As we've discussed already, fortunately, no style is better than any other style. Every style has its strengths and weaknesses. Next point, you are far more than your style. Your style is a significant part of who you are, but it's only a part of you. Your personality includes your style, but there's much more to you than that. You are also the beliefs that you hold, the values that you're committed to, your attitudes, your expectations, the goals that you strive for, the relationships that you nurture, the idiosyncrasies that characterize you, and much, much more. Remember, we are more than a simple style. You are different from the other styles. People of a given style are similar to each other in important ways, but they are far from identical to one another. Differences between people of similar styles are striking. Here are some examples of expressives. So here are some examples of people that fall into this bottom right category. Muhammad Ali, Bill Clinton, Bill Cosby, Jesse Jackson, Liza Minnelli, Oprah Winfrey. Now, they are all expressives with important behavioral characteristics in common, yet they are very, very different people in many ways that it's hard to believe that you could even cram all of those people in the same category. One of the great traps that people fall into when contemplating people's styles is ignoring the differences that exist within each style. Don't allow yourself to fall into that simplistic mindset that thinks if you've seen one, you've seen them all. Your acceptance of each of these styles enables you to make this model work for you rather than against. So acceptance of your style means that you acknowledge the style's worth without approval of its limitations. As an accepting person who notes the downside of a person's style, you don't ignore or condone the behavior, but neither do you blow it out of proportion. The opposite of acceptance is a judgmental mindset. With effort, however, each of us can learn to view other styles with acceptance and even appreciation. We can realize how boring would life be if we were all the same style. Variety is undoubtedly the spice of life. When you accept the other styles and celebrate their strengths, you are able to build productive relationships with people who are very different from yourself. Now, as we go through each of these styles, attempt to make a conscious effort to appreciate each one of these styles. So let's look at each of these styles. So by now, I would hope that you guys have already completed the behavioral styles inventory, i.e. you've answered the 18 questions, the A's or B's. Remember, odds. If you answered mostly A's for the odd question, you're less assertive. Answered mostly B's for the odds, you're more assertive, i.e. you're on the right-hand side of the line. If you've answered mostly A's for the even number questions, you are less responsive, so you're above the aligners, or you're more responsive if you've answered mostly B's for the even number question, i.e. you're more responsive. Please determine your style now. Thank you. Okay, information for analyticals. So now we're looking at the analyticals right here. People from this quadrant combine considerable emotional restraint with less than average assertiveness. The analytical is the most perfectionist of the styles. Analytical people want things they're associated with to be right. Some styles shoot from the hip. Ready, fire, aim, advises well-known management consultant. But analyticals are appalled at such advice. Long before current quality movement, they were urging, let's do it right so that we don't have to do it over again. Analyticals set very, very high standards, and they're willing to do the time-consuming work needed to achieve or exceed those standards. Analyticals are sticklers for details. Since they believe in vigorous attention to every aspect of a project, no matter how insignificant, contributes to the final outcome. Analyticals tend to be the most critical of all the styles. Because of their perfectionistic tendencies, they are often quite hard on themselves. and hard on others. Their exacting standards cause them to be generally very sparing with compliments and expression of appreciation. Analyticals need to guard against these tendencies because it can be demoralizing to work for somebody who is big on criticism and small on compliments. The analytical is known for being systematic and well organized. At best, this style is adept at building highly effective processes that produce consistently outstanding results. At worst, however, the analytical's methodical bent can degenerate into the bureaucracy of excessive regulations and the by-the-book mentality. This style craves data. The more data, the better. When you see an effective analytical converting that data into useful information, you understand the truth of the saying, knowledge is power. When facing risks, the analytical tends to be prudent. Many take calculated risks, but some are reluctant to do even that. As a rule, the analyticals would rather be safe than sorry. Don't expect these prudent people to be cavalier about decision making. They want to be certain of making the right choice, but such certainty is not possible. Analyticals gather as much information as they can. Even so, there's seldom enough data about the options for them to be comfortable about making a decision. They try to weigh the options, which usually include imponderables. As a result, analyticals often agonize over decisions. Some become really stressed about even the small decisions, such as what to do, what to order when eating out. An analytical likes to be alone and also or with just a few people. If possible, they'll leave the big gatherings and cocktail parties to others. They would rather stay at home and read a book. A person of this style is rarely linked closely to the grapevine, but may be tapped into the internet. An analytical has an office can usually be found in it. The door is probably closed. They prefer to work alone than work with others. Despite the analytical solitary nature, they surprise you by being loyal when the going gets rough. Though this style isn't overtly people oriented, sorry, we're talking about analyticals now. Yep. Though this person is not typically people oriented, in crunch situations, the analytical often tries to see that employees are treated fairly. The analytical's body language is low key. They walk out, they walk slowly. Actually, they walk more slower than the right side of the liners, so the more assertive types. They tend to lean back in the chair even when making a point. Analyticals, they don't gesture as much, and their gestures tend to be smaller, less flowing, less emphatic than is common. Nor are they noted for having much eye contact or facial expressiveness. They tend to dress conservatively. If they have an office, they probably prefer business-like decor. The analytical is actually the quietest of the styles. They tend to speak less often than other people in the other styles, except when delving into great detail on a topic. When the analytical talks, the volume is low, the pace is slow, there's little inflection in the voice. People of this style like to think things through before speaking. They continue thinking as they talk, scanning their minds for the right words or phrase to communicate content accurately. This leads to frequent hesitations which others may find annoying. Also, since they are thinking about what they say as they speak, they're also apt to interrupt themselves mid-sentence and and bring a new thought that just came into mind, a trait that often confuses listeners. It's easy to understand why a person of this style tends to favor written over spoken communication. The content of an analytical's conversation has some distinguishing characteristics. When talking, an analytical typically is more task-oriented than people-oriented. They approach issues logically and even in casual conversation is apt to break what he is saying into points in the first place, secondly, and thirdly, etc. Analytical strive for accuracy and expect it in others. They want people to furnish them with details. When they explain something, they normally give more miniature, more minutia than people of that the other styles want. They are more apt to analyze an issue and see the complexity involved, then they are decisive. Sorry, I'll start again. They are more apt to analyze an issue and see the complexity involved than they are to decisively recommend a course of action. Analyticals tend to be indirect when making a request or stating an opinion. The comment, perhaps we should consider such and so forth, may mean I think we should I think we should do it. Sometimes an analytical asks a question but is really making a statement, such as, do you think it would be wise to, might mean, I'd actually like you to take this course of action. Analyticals don't wear their feelings on their sleeve. They may feel as deeply about an issue as anybody else, but they'll probably talk about the facts of the case rather than their feelings about it. They often intellectualize feelings, both their own and those of other people. People often find analyticals hard to read because they show little emotion. Sometimes analyticals are not in touch with their own feelings. Their heads shout so loudly that they can't hear what their guts are saying. The analytical tries to avoid emotionality that's related to conflict. When others get carried away by emotions, analyticals retreat into their heads and become emotionally detached. People of this style assume a rational approach with cool uh, with cool heads. It often has the opposite result. Expressives, in particular, become more upset when the analytical tries to get them to talk calmly and rationally during a conflict. When the analytical avoids conflict, important issues are tabled because problems are left unattended and significant opportunities may be missed. Analyticals are punctual for appointments, but tardy in making deadlines. Their quest for perfection leads them to a set of standards which are very, very hard to keep deadlines for. They examine more options, they research each alternative with exceptional thoroughness. When the research is finally concluded, they take an unusual long time to arrive at a decision. Every aspect of the analytical is slower than that of the more assertive styles. Now remember, no one is exactly true to each style. These are generalizations. The average analytical will have most of the characteristics that I've just described, but not all of them. So when working with an analytical, be alert to the characteristics of this style, but also look for the behaviors that may be exceptions to the rule. When people use this style poorly, it's not a productive way of working. However, analyticals that use their style well are on a great pathway to success. Let's look at the next style. The next style we're going to have a look at are the amiables. Another type of person that you're working with is the amiable. This style is located on the lower left quadrant. The amiable gets things done in a manner that's less assertive than average, combined with a more than average responsiveness. The amiable and the analytical share a similar level of assertiveness. Therefore, in this portrait, you'll find numerous similarities between the amiables and the analyticals that I've just discussed. The difference between these two left of the line styles is their degree of responsiveness. The amiable shows considerably more emotion than the analytical, and this distinction is connected to a number of other behavioral differences between these two styles. To a greater degree than is typical of the other styles, the amiable is a team player. Let me just move to the next screen. Yep, there we go. The amiable is a team player. They normally prefer working with others, especially in small groups or one-on-one. So they prefer to work with other people rather than in small groups or individually. They don't seek. Sorry, I'll start that again. They normally prefer working with others. Sorry, they do prefer working in smaller groups or one-on-one. They don't seek the spotlight, and they seldom get into ego clashes with one another. Amiables are actually less than the more assertive styles and are less likely to seek power for themselves. They can be skilled at encouraging others to expand on their ideas and are good at seeing value in other people's contributions. As a result of their openness to the opinions or options of others, they are sometimes able to salvage a person's worthwhile ideas that other team members are quick to discount. People of this style may also be adept at integrating conflict options into a synthesis that all parties can generally support. Amiable's effectiveness as a team player is enhanced by their generosity, with their time. If a coworker asks for advice or help, the amiable will drop what they are doing and help. They often volunteer to do unglamorous, out of the limelight activities for the team, and because of their dedicated backstage work, they are unsung heroes in many a team effort. While this unselfishness is often constructive, the amiable may overdo it to such an extent as to default on delivering his or her own commitments in a timely manner. The amiable's quiet friendliness is an asset in working with people. Both the below the line styles, which are the amiables and the expressives, are very people oriented. The expressives, though, are more rambunctious about it. The amiable takes a bit more of a low-key approach. With this easygoing, likable manner, the amiable appears to build relationships more easily than most people. Ties to others are often more personal than is characteristic of the other styles. People of this style back up their friendliness with empathy. They're generally more interested in hearing your concerns than they are expressing their own. Amiables are especially sensitive to other people's feelings. When compassion is appropriate, it shows on their faces and in their eyes as well as in their words. Consequently, people tend to confide in them. The amiable usually performs best in a stable, clearly structured situation. This style is not as enamored of goal setting and planning as the above the line styles. Amiables often prefer to have the organization define their role and set their goals, as long as the demands aren't unreasonable. Once their role is clarified and the direction is set, they work steadily in the performance of their duties. As a rule, people of this style are industrious, service-oriented workers. Because of their easygoing, friendly, unpretentious ways, other people may not realize how much work they actually turn out. Some amiables, however, overdo their friendliness and are sidetracked from task by their desire to relate to people. If all work can be said to consist of task aspects and people or maintenance aspects, drivers and analyticals, so the above the liners, are prone to overemphasizing the task aspects, while the amiables and the expressives, the ones that are below the liners, more responsive, um, they'll give a disproportionate amount of time and attention to the relationships with other people. Some people are better at creating products, organizations, while others are better at maintaining them. Amiables shine at the maintainers, as the maintainers. They value what has already been created and find satisfaction in working to preserve it. Also, to a greater degree than most people, the amiables are comfortable doing routine procedures and following process established by other people. The amiable, like the analytical, tends to be quite indecisive and takes a cautious approach to decision making, looking for guarantees to lower the risks involved. This style touches base with the people affected by a decision before coming to any final conclusions. The amiable often delay making decisions, especially when risk is involved or when it's controversial and when people are likely to be upset by the outcome. The amiable, however, may also delay making a decision simply because they find it so uncomfortable to make a clear-cut choice. The amiable is conscientious but not enthusiastic about reading memos and reports, preferring instead to hear directly from the people themselves. So when they can, amiables talk face to face or get on the phone. Many are well connected to the grapevine as well. Amiables typically are patient with other people and with organizations. They may gripe about a bad situation, but they're likely to carry on. They do have a limit though. If you persist too long in treating them in ways that they don't like, they'll eventually become angry and will be very, very slow to forgive and forget. The amiable's body language is quite low key. The style walks a little bit more slower than the more assertive styles and has a less erect posture. They often lean back in their chair when making a request or stating an opinion. Amiables rely on gestures when communicating, and their movement tends to be fluid and graceful, though not dramatic. They're comfortable with eye contact and are facially expressive. In conversation, the amiables tend to use less airtime than the more assertive styles. They're usually slower in forming an opinion about recommended course of action than the drivers or the expressives. So when a course of action is being discussed, the amiable input tends to come late in the session or even not at all. The amiable's voice is warm and the volume is low. The style also speaks more slowly than the right of the line styles. Their taste in clothes can be characterized as appropriate and, when the situation allows, casual. The amiable's conversation is more people-oriented than task-oriented. People of this style are gracious with small talk. They speak more about people and feelings than the above-the-line styles. They're apt to ask you how your trip went last week or how your child did in a recent game or competition. Their focus on people and feelings continues when the discussion turns to work issues. Few, if any, topics are strictly business uh, Few, if any, topics are strictly business for people of this style. They wonder, for example, how people in the department feel about the new procedure being discussed. This consistent attention to the human component of work can enhance morale and make the process of change far less disruptive than it might be without the amiable's influence in the team. It's often thought that the amiable is very disclosing. Their facial expressions seem very open. In conversation, amiables reveal personal things about themselves that make people feel that they know them better than they know most other people. Often, however, amiables are surprisingly guarded. They don't communicate many of the thoughts and feelings that are important to them. This type of person especially withholds feelings of anger and withholds critical judgments of others. The amiable can seem to be calm on the outside even when a storm is raging on the inside. When amiables make a request or state an opinion, they're inclined to phrase it indirectly. They often state their point of view, like the analyticals, by asking a question rather than declaring, let's move ahead with campaign X. They might say, do you think campaign X is the right way to go? Or they might quote others who share the same opinion. A lot of people are saying that campaign X seems to be the way to go, for example. The asking-oriented tendency of the amiable may become too pronounced, leading people to complain. I never know where the amiable is coming from. I wish they would take a clear stand on things. When people work together, there's always bound to be conflict. Some conflict is productive, although much is destructive. Because amiables treasure harmonious relationships, they are natural peacekeepers and are often found pouring oil on troubled water. Their efforts at conciliation often make continued collaboration possible. At times, though, they go overboard with their efforts to try and smooth things over, even when hard issues must be faced and resolved. Many amiables are reluctant to tell it how it is for fear of alienating the other person. When options or opinions are divided about a course of action, amiables are more likely than the average person to withhold their point of view. They may hesitate to consent a point, even when they think they're right and important issues are at stake. They may dislike conflict so much that they may say what they think the other person wants to hear rather than what they believe themselves. Amiables who don't overcome this, uh, the amiables that actually don't overcome this, stand to lose credibility with people who doubt that they can count on them when the chips are down. Another drawback related to this particular quadrant, the amiables, is that they need to maintain pleasant relationships, or then through their need to maintain pleasant relationships, is an unwillingness to confront a person's performance problems. Amiables tend to avoid giving corrective feedback, yet they may be more critical than they let on. They may voice to a third party the critique that would do more good if stated directly to the person being criticized. As a manager, the amiable can be slow to a fault in dealing with an employee's inadequate performance. This style is often squeamish about using authority, and when they finally apply it, they may use it inconsistently. High-performing amiables do overcome the tendency to conceal true opinions, yet they preserve their concern for the other person and the desire not to harm the relationship. Their tact enables them to say the hard things while leaving other person's ego intact. Their diplomatic timing and phrasing may enable their message to get through to people who are close to the same idea expressed more bluntly by others. When we give a general description of a style, we're really speaking broadly of that style. Few amiables have all of the characteristics that I've just described. People of the style have some characteristics typical. As we've said, this is, and it's especially true of the analyticals who share the lower degree of assertiveness. Expressives also share some characteristics with amiables because both styles have more responsiveness than average. 25% of the population are amiables. As with all of the other styles, this style does have its strengths and weaknesses, and like all other styles, an amiable who can work on their style effectively are on a sound pathway to success. Let's look at the next style. The next style to look at is the bottom right quadrant, which is the expressive style, the more responsive and more assertive. So right of the liners and also the below the liners. So you find a lot of expressives in the workplace. People in this quadrant integrate a high level of assertiveness with much more emotional expression, responsiveness. We've already mentioned that the amiables and the expressives have characteristics in common because both sides show more responsiveness than most people. Later on, you'll note the similarities between the expressives and the drivers because the two styles are highly assertive. There are a number of characteristics, however, that are distinctive to the expressive. This style is the most flamboyant of the style. Expressives tend toward the dramatic. They like bright colors, bold statements, and eye-catching projects. This style thrives on being in the limelight and seems to gravitate naturally to center stage. The spirited style bristles with energy. The expressive seems to have enough pep for two people. Expressives' vim, vigor, and vitality are evident in nearly everything that they do. The sheer energy of expressives, when combined with other aspects of their highly assertiveness, can make them seem a little overwhelming at times. Every once in a while, a person of this style temporarily runs out of steam, but that usually takes place when the stimulus of other people is missing. Because their sluggish moments occur when nobody's around, the expressive seems even more tirelessly energetic than is actually the case. Perhaps because of their abundant energy, expressives want to be continually on the go. They don't like to spend too long in any one spot, and they enjoy being where the action is. So, you often see them walking about or hopping into their car. They hate to be confined to a desk all day long. When required to sit through long meetings, the expressives' restless energy is actually quite evident. They continuously shift about in their chair. They're always moving their feet and their legs, gesturing with their hands and their arms, toying with the paperclip or a pencil, drumming with their fingers on the table. When bored at meetings, the expressive is unlikely to be subtly tuned out. Rather, they'll be engaged in a side conversation or fully and obviously and intensely mistaken completely disengaged. The expressive is the most outgoing of the styles. In contrast with the amiable, who conveys quiet friendliness, the expressive takes on more hale and hearty approach to people. The style is interpersonally proactive. Despite some inner qualms that may arise at times, these people seem to relate easily and effortlessly to strangers. As a result, a person of this outgoing style tends to have a large circle of acquaintances than do people of the other styles. When expressives have a choice of doing something alone or with other people, they prefer to link up with others. They invite people out for lunch, they like to play tennis after work, or they go cycling on the weekends. When they travel out of town, they make an effort to look up old acquaintances in the area that they're visiting. This high contact type of person spends considerable time on the telephone with a lot of people. These people are quite naturals at networking, have uh, a numerous amount of contacts who can help them achieve their goal. People of this style tend lend credibility to the saying, "Who you know is as important as what you know." Expressives tend to be dreamers. Their vision is typically bold and imaginative. They push people to look beyond the merely mundane and practical. They love blue skying sessions. where imagination can soar without concern for pragmatic constraints. Every organization needs people who can envisage great projects and who can conceive a bigger, better, brighter future for the department or organization. Expressives help co-workers rise above uh, unimaginative approaches to work. It's said, or it's been said, that to create castles in the air, it's necessary to build foundations underneath them. And this is where the expressives are weak. They resist getting sufficiently involved in the nitty-gritty, even when it's essential to achieving their dream. This style likes to focus on the more broad generalizations than on the specific facts. The expressive is interested in the forest rather than the trees and is content to have others do the details. When you and others are hard at work with the nitty-gritty effort to build the foundation under the castle in the air that an expressive sold you on, you may find that he or she is not working along with you. They are off dreaming of other castles rather than helping you finish the one at hand. Expressives are impulsive. They have a tendency to act first and think later. Many expressives use a particular image to describe this aspect of their life. First, I dive into the pool and then I look to see if there's any water in it. As a result of this tendency, people of this style have to work their way out of more than their share of problems, which are of their own making. After observing an expressive friend trying to recover from yet another crisis that seemed unnecessary, an analytical tactfully asked, "Why didn't you just plan ahead to avoid these needless hassles?" Ultimately, said the expressive, my way takes less time. You analyticals plan for eventualities that may never happen, and planning is such a drag. Besides, I like the excitement of improvising myself out of these jams. It's a lot better than planning. The impulsiveness of the expressive often creates problems for themselves and others in the workplace. They prefer to work according to opportunity rather than according to plan. Few are good at time management. These easily diverted people pay less attention to the clock, time, and calendar than the other styles do. They're often late to meetings, or they may even miss them altogether. And they're often behind schedule with projects too. Some habitually miss deadlines. Others become adept at catching up at the last minute. People are likely to get annoyed at the expressive, seemingly free and easy approach to time. The expressive's own feelings have a powerful impact on them as well. More than any other style, they're on an emotional roller coaster. When emotionally high, they're ecstatic. When low, they tend to hit the pits. People often find it very difficult to deal with these emotional extremes. Yet, because of their emotionality, the expressive's enthusiasm in up times is contagious. Though people of this style can be good motivators, the expressive is often exceptionally effective at helping recharge their emotional batteries. Expressives are playful and fun-loving. They usually find a way to schedule some recreation into a crowded day. These people love a good time themselves and enjoy prompting happiness in others. They like to tell jokes, describe humorous incidents, think up pranks, and laugh heartily. If a person noted for throwing great parties said, one key to a lively gathering is making sure there's a number of expressives in the group. Expressives look for a way to make work more enjoyable, even more fun. They're apt to suggest you'll meet you'll meet in the coffee shop rather than in the office. They may kid around for a few minutes before plunging into a topic at hand. They often find a humorous slant on something in an otherwise serious discussion. One expressive CEO we know gave each new employee a Mickey Mouse wristwatch and said, if work ever stops being fun, turn your watch in and we'll find a job you enjoy. This very competitive CEO assumed that if you had fun at work, not only is it better for you, but you'll be more productive too. When expressives talk, their whole body joins in. Like the amiables, they use flowing gestures, but they use even more of them. And the motions are bigger and they're more forceful. The facial expressions are the most communicative of all the styles. More than any other style, expressives modulate the pitch and tone of their voice to match what they're saying. They are constantly changing the inflection, which helps to hold people's attention. with their entire body language helping to communicate their message. Expressives at their best can do an exceptional job of getting a point across to an individual, a group, or a large audience. Expressives are definitely assertive or tell-assertive. They advocate more than inquire. They're more into talking than they are into listening. They have a tendency to interrupt others and monopolize the conversation. Though expressives may be perceptive in what they say and entertaining in the way they say it, they sometimes turn people off by their one-sided conversations. The hale and hearty expressive speaks with a loud voice. In a restaurant, it may be easier to hear the expressive 4 tables away than it is to hear those left of the line diners that might be sitting directly across from you. Expressives are the most verbally fluent of the style. Their words seem to flow effortlessly. They appear to have a large vocabulary with immediate access to it. People of this style tend to speak very rapidly, and only a few drivers can match them with their speaking pace. When expressive they often think out loud. As an expressive friend put it, I speak to find out what I'm thinking. Digressions are par for course with this style. When an expressive is holding the floor, they may skip from topic to topic in ways that seem to defy logic. Storytelling is part and parcel of the expressive's way of communicating. They break the ice with a joke or humorous incident that happened to them or to a mutual acquaintance. When making a point, they are more likely to cite an example than present a string of facts. They probably won't quote any statistics, unless, of course, the numbers are very dramatic. Regarding the content of their conversations, expressives are more people-oriented than task-oriented. It's not to say they're disinterested in getting a task done. It's just the manner of doing it has a more people focus to it. For example, if you meet with an expressive about a specific issue, don't expect to get to the point right away. If the expressive takes the lead, as will undoubtedly happen, the initial part of that conversation is likely to be about you, about both of you, the other people. He or she may tell a story before focusing on the actual issue itself. For the expressive, these topics aren't besides the point, but are an important prelude to conversations about substantive issues. The above the line styles, who are more task focused, often consider that extended rapport building a waste of time, and they actually make it tense waiting for the expressive to get down to business already. The expressive thinks this is business. After all, what is business if it's not people talking to each other? The expressive is apt to be upfront about saying what they do or don't like about your proposal or your behavior. This is a tell it like it is style, although expressives may not mean any offense to their comments, which are sometimes abrasive, especially to the less assertive folks. Yet, this willingness to raise the hard issues which can be crucial to productivity may stimulate people to work on issues that require attention. Not every expressive has all of these characteristics that I've just described. However, you will spend a lot of time with this style and they make up 25% of the population. And as with the other styles, they have their great strengths and their great weaknesses too. When used effectively, can be a very successful style. We have one more style to look at. This last style is the driver. The other type of person that you will want to work with, or that you will work with, is the driver. This style is located on the upper right area of the grid. Drivers blend higher than average level of assertiveness with a less than average amount of emotional responsiveness. The driver is results focused. This, the most practical of the style, prides itself on the bottom line orientation. A strong goal orientation characterizes the driver. This style loves nothing more than to set high yet realistic objectives and then sets about accomplishing them. However, these are very independent people. They want to set their own goals rather than have someone else set them. The driver is a get it done type of person. While an analytical is thinking about a problem, the amiable is meeting about the problem, the expressive is talking about the problem, the driver is doing something about it. The action may not be the best solution, however, but the driver feels relieved that something's just getting done. The driver believes that our business is not to see what lies at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. Unfortunately, with their excessive focus on the immediate situation, drivers might not give sufficient consideration to the long-range implications of their actions. Decisiveness is a salient characteristic of drivers. They don't agonize over decision like the left of the liners do. The analytical is seeking to make the right decision. The amiable is looking for guarantees that the outcome will be satisfactory. The driver takes a very different approach to decision making. Drivers believe that indecision is a decision, and a bad one at that. Also, they're not compulsive about the quality of their decision. When you are 55% sure, it's time to act, is what a driver would think. If you wait until you're 95% sure, you won't succeed in this competitive, fast-paced environment. Rather than try to make the right decision every time, rather than secure guarantees that every decision will work out, if 6 out of 10 of my decisions pan out, the driver would say, I'm ahead of the game. When a decision does turn out poorly, the driver actually often takes it quite philosophically. Well, you win some, you lose some. This seemingly offhand approach to important decisions often seems irresponsible to the left side of the liners. In matters of opinion and of policy, drivers are more likely to change their mind than the less assertive styles, the analyticals, the amiables. Because drivers are so purposeful and rational, people are often surprised about the abrupt changes in their thinking and the sudden shifts in their plans. It's not like a driver to do an about face that leaves everybody astounded. President Richard Nixon was one of communism's foes for years. Then he surprised the world by establishing diplomatic ties with communist China. Drivers are often puzzled by others' strong reactions to their reversals of position. The analytical tendency to theorize and commit to principles and creates a fairly consistent outlook. The amiable is generally more wedded to the status quo than the driver. The amiable also anticipates the emotional discomfort people will experience as a result of the change. The driver, however, is more focused on the immediate situation than on the theory or principle of the feelings. In the driver's mind, the situation has changed and response needs to change. And the response also needs to change. And that appraisal may be accurate. However, drivers sometimes are so fast-paced and action-oriented that they may improvise a hasty and ill-conceived course of action that merely sets the stage for a new batch of problems. Drivers do typically excel at time management. Books and courses on this topic usually consist of a smorgasbord of methods that are characterized by the task, orientation, and efficiency. Once when we studied the time management practices of 300 managers, we found that the way that drivers worked was by far the closest match to the usual cluster of time management methodologies or methods. The driver's body language suggests purposefulness. Their posture is erect. They seem to lean into everything they do. They walk, move faster than most people. They gesture, though fewer and smaller, less flowing than the expressives, can be quite forceful with their gestures. The driver's facial expressions tend to be more serious than the below-the-line styles and more intense than the analyticals. When stating their point of view, the driver's eye contact is direct, sometimes to the listener's discomfort. Like every other characteristic, drivers' speech is fast-paced. There's little vocal inflection. Drivers are quite forthright in stating their opinion or making requests. They're factual but not detailed, rational but not theoretical, direct and to the point. Combine this with the no-frills conversational style with rapid delivery, a leaning-in posture, forceful gestures, and eye contact that may seem piercing, and you can understand why some of the left of the lines or the less assertive people can be intimidated by the driver's style of communication. A driver takes a task-oriented approach to the communication. They may discipline themselves to engage in a little bit of small talk, but it's not their forte, and the effort to build rapport also appears to be forced by the other styles, especially the below-the-line styles. Once the preliminaries are dispensed with, drivers often rat-a-tat their way through an agenda until your time's up. The slower-paced, analytical, and amiable may feel bulldozed by this quick and relentless push through an agenda. The amiable and the expressive, whose behaviors are more people-oriented, are apt to reflect, he didn't even treat us like people, they might say. Drivers can accomplish a tremendous amount in a short period of time. However, if people are feeling bulldozed or depersonalized, then there's a danger that that project may be illusionary rather than real. Other people's lack of buy-in or outright resistance may delay or sabotage the outcomes. When we say that a driver is task-oriented rather than people-oriented, we don't imply a lack of caring about people. A driver may have sincere concern for other people, but just not talk about it as much as the below-the-line person might do. Nor does their style, body language reveal the deep concern that they may have for other people as well. Drivers are doers, and their feelings are often channeled into the language of action. Over the years, we've witnessed the trauma of downsizing one corporation after another, and have seen a number of drivers make a greater effort to give concrete, tangible assistance to those affected than have many of their colleagues who had appeared more concerned. The driver's high energy and fast-paced purposefulness and directness of speech can trigger resentment in people. People often think of the driver as being the most assertive style, yet the expressive is just as assertive as the driving style. The difference between these two styles that you might recall is that the expressive is a little bit more emotionally responsive, more emotionally disclosing, and more people-oriented. The expressive is apt to inquire about your spouse and kids and tell you about a humorous incident that happened last week. Expressives fool around sometimes and entertain with stories, wisecracks, jokes, appearing as it does in the below-the-line package of behaviors. Assertiveness may seem less stark than it otherwise would. By contrast, the driver actually comes across as purposeful rather than playful. They're perceived as task-oriented rather than people-oriented. So when they're being assertive, that's what you're seeing, and typically little else. Consequently, a driver may seem more forceful than an equally assertive, expressive might. And again, not all drivers match exactly what's in the description that I've just gone through, nor is this style better or worse than any other styles. Remember, strengths and weaknesses of the style of every style exist, and when using your style well can be extremely effective and productive. Okay, so now we have just completed talking about each of the 4 styles. The next thing to talk about is actually styles under stress. It's what we call backup or having a backup style. So your backup style. So what is a backup style? People move from their normal style into a characteristic backup style in response to stress or excessive stress. So unintentionally, their behavior becomes more extreme and more inflexible. Backup style is a response to excessive levels of stress. So some stress, of course, is desirable. Stress can actually lead or add a little spice to life. In the proper amounts, stress adds zest to our days, enhances our performance. That's why athletes tend to like to get psyched up for a competition. Excessive stress, though, is uncomfortable and dangerous. While backup behavior provides a way of relieving some of a person's own stress, it generates stress in other people. The switch from normal to backup behavior is not a conscious choice. It actually just pops out of the pole automatically, it just pops out of people automatically. In response to a stressful situation, a person's normal style-based behavior becomes extreme. The person pushes his regular tendencies to the hilt. Backup behavior is overkill. So expressives, who are usually socially engaging, attack. Drivers who are normally directive become autocratic. Amiables, who are typically supportive and cooperative, acquiesce. Analyticals, who are usually quiet and less emotional, avoid. If we go back one slide, what a style does under stress or in backup mode is actually push further along their assertive line. So drivers and expressives under stress become more assertive. Analyticals and amiables under stress push and actually become less assertive than they normally even are. So let's talk about expressives. that are in backup style. So expressives, under normal circumstances, the expressives are people-oriented. When overloaded with tension, they focus their frustrations on other people as well. Again, it becomes an extreme style. These normally assertive and emotive people become even more assertive and even more emotionally unrestrained when they are stressed. In backup, they often resort to strong and abusive language, a loud, often shouting voice, an emphatic and belligerent gesture. Someone is usually the butt of the loud, exaggerated, angry personal attack by the expressive who is in backup mode. Expressives are quick-tempered and hot-headed. They boil much more quickly than most people. But it's over and done with. When it's over and done with, they're usually ready to let bygones be bygones. They expend their rage quickly, and then it's finished. They get angry quickly, but also get over things very, very quickly too. Some expressives do feel bad for making loud and excessive verbal attacks that may have even hurt somebody's feelings. Nobody likes to be the victim of a verbal abuse, especially nobody likes to be the victim of verbal abuse. People express themselves. The expressive people themselves tend to be more understanding of other expressives' flare-ups. I'll say that again. Nobody likes to be the victim of a verbal abuse. However, an expressive themselves tend to be more understanding of other expressives when they flare up. Drivers can understand the expressive's assertiveness pressure, but would prefer that the expressive would exert more emotional control. The expressive outbursts have a more unsettling effect on the amiables and the analyticals. The expressive's loud and loaded personal attacks may alarm these left of the liners, since the latter would have to be much more upset to launch such a blistering attack. Some of the wounding remarks are hard for the amiables and the analyticals to forget. Furthermore, the left of the line people are usually more judicious about what they say, even when they're angry, so they might think to themselves, if they said that, they must mean that. They wouldn't say it unless they thought about it first, the amiable and the analytical may consider. They may also get upset at the way that the expressive dismisses the incident after verbally blowing them out of the water, but expressives have gotten the stress out of the system and soon ready to proceed as if nothing has happened. Let's talk about the drivers who are in backup, their backup style. So normally strong-willed, drivers under extreme stress become very controlling. They try to impose their thoughts and plans onto others. They seem utterly unbending, closed to any ideas but their own. When drivers are in backup, they may express even less emotion than usual. Their eyes have a steely glint of determination, but probably don't show much else. Not much given to gestures anyway. Drivers in backup tend to have a ramrod posture and may concentrate all their gestures into a vigorously pointing index finger. The voice of drivers in backup may be somewhat loud and abrasive, or they may speak in an authoritatively quiet voice like a resolute Clint Eastwood character. In defense of their backup style, some drivers may say, sure, I may get a little autocratic when I'm stressed, but at least I don't lose it. There's a task to be done, and I'll see that that task gets done. I see no reason for apologizing for that, is what a driver might say. Other drivers, however, feel sorry that they've been imperious and intimidating. No one likes the uncompromising insistence of drivers in backup that their goals be achieved, their plans be implemented, their schedule to be followed, their ideas carry the day. Plans conceived in backup are usually flawed. However, when the ideas are sound, the insensitive and autocratic manner in which a driver announces them usually provokes sufficient resistance to doom them to failure. Expressives can often understand a driver's strong-mindedness, even if they don't like it, but they usually resent the unemotional facade put forth by the driver in backup mode. The expressive attitude is, if you're upset, say so. Don't mask your anger with this business-like facade with facts and figures. The normally fast-paced drivers tend to decide and act even quicker when in backup, which puts enormous pressure on the slower-paced styles. Drivers escalated attention to task and consequently their diminished emphasis on people is especially galling, irritating, and annoying to the amiables and the analyticals. Let's have a look at the next one. Amiables in backup and under stress. So in periods of low stress, amiables are quiet, friendly, and cooperative. They like to relate to others with minimal interpersonal tension. So that's in periods of low stress. That's just in normal. While stress goads some people into shouting insults at others and others into rigidly controlling behavior, the amiable's desire to avoid conflict and appease others becomes even more pronounced when in backup and when in stress. They go overboard in appearing cooperative and trying to minimize interpersonal tension. It's often very, very difficult to know when an amiable is in backup. When an expressive is in backup, the world knows about it. When a driver is highly stressed, it doesn't take long for us to experience his or her excessively controlling ways. When an amiable slips into backup, unobtrusively, he or she may still be smiling and as agreeable as ever, even saying, sure, that's okay. While it seems as though nothing has changed when an amiable goes into backup, your first clue is often a gut feeling that something is wrong, though you can't put your finger on the reason why you feel that way. When you observe the person more carefully, you'll note that although you're hearing the agreeable words, the music of the body language has changed. The tone of voice or the facial expression, the gestures, the posture are mechanical, empty of commitment. If amiables do put words to their frustration, they're only hinting at it. Rather than make a fuss or be overly controlling, amiables try to keep the peace. Other amiables realize that all backup styles, including their own, are stressful to people and regret that their backup behavior may have been difficult for others to cope with. Expressives who thrive on self-disclosure dislike it when a person feels one way but acts another. If there's a problem, the expressive believes, let's get it out on the table and talk or shout it through so that we can get beyond it. But don't act like everything is fine when it isn't. Drivers have little patience with peace, uh, with drivers have little patience with peace at any price behavior. Analyticals can understand the desire to avoid conflict, but dislike the way that the amiable who is in backup goes about it. Analyticals find it distasteful when people say things that they don't believe, which is what they think amiables do when they're in backup mode. Backup behavior is inflexible. The amiable's backup behavior often seems flexible, but in its own way, it's actually very rigid, and as the backup as the back as is the backup behavior of any style is. Perhaps you've sensed that an amiable is upset. You may want to discuss whether you've done anything to cause that reaction. Even though it's obvious that something's wrong, the amiable in backup generally says that everything is all right and is totally inflexible in insisting that there is no need to talk about the stress that's impacting the relationship. In their own quiet way, the amiable in backup is as rigid and is as inflexible as anybody else might be. Amiable's willingness to go with what you want to do based on a desire to avoid conflict rather than a commitment to what's been agreed on. Although generally supportive under normal circumstances, amiables back up, respond with compliance rather than genuine cooperation. They say they'll go along, but they may not do what they agreed to. In fact, the anger the amiable feels doesn't express directly and may occasionally show itself in subtle forms of sabotage. It takes actually longer for the amiable to move into backup style more than the assertive style. So the right-sided liners tend to move into their backup style a lot faster. Once there, though, the amiables tend to stay there for a much longer period of time. They are slow to anger, but they are much, much slower to forgive and forget. Beware of the fury of the patient man. The last style to investigate here is the analyticals. So let's have a look at the analyticals and backup. So just like the amiables, the analytical and backup tries to avoid interpersonal tension, but analyticals have their own way of coping with excess stress while seeking to avoid conflict. Analyticals are quiet, emotionally reserved people who generally prefer working alone to working with others. In backup, these tendencies become more extreme. When analyticals experience an overload of tension, they avoid both emotional expression and interpersonal involvement. Hence, this style in backup is referred to as avoiding. In this avoiding mode, analyticals whose normal style is to be on the quiet side stay even less quieter than usual. If they do speak, their communication is rational, factual, and logical. Analyticals' vocal intonation, facial expressiveness, and gestures, all of which under normal situations are quite understated, are even more limited in backup mode. In the process of becoming excessively rational and avoiding virtually all expression of feeling, analyticals and backup withdraw emotionally from people they are with. Though physically present, they are perceived as personally absent from the interactions. Sometimes emotional withdrawal doesn't give sufficient relief. Under those circumstances, analyticals may try to avoid people and seek refuge in being alone. They may manufacture reasons for leaving a meeting or an appointment, or they may stalk out in a rare display of emotion. In justification of their backup behavior, some analyticals say that remaining unemotional when they're stressed is far better than making a scene. They also believe that when a person is severely stressed, withdrawal from other people is the best thing that can be done. Other analyticals realize that they're not their normal selves when in backup and regret the negative effect that non-participation and emotional withdrawal might have on other people. Drivers who like to tackle things head on are frustrated by the analytical's avoidance when in backup. The more feeling, people-oriented styles, the expressives and the amiables, may be put off by the analytical's normal emotional reserve. They strongly dislike the further emotional withdrawal that occurs when an analytical is in backup mode. You can sense the frustration in an expressive comments. I can deal with hate, I can deal with anger, I can deal with despair. I can deal with anybody who's feeling anything, but I can't deal with nothing. As we progress deeper into backup, so as people move into backup mode, their tensions often decrease over time and they return to their normal behavior. However, this is where it gets really interesting, guys. If the stress continues to build still further, they are likely to shift into what we call a secondary backup style. The secondary backup style is quite different from their normal style or their primary backup style. While the primary backup style is an exaggeration or intensification of one style-based behavior, the person's secondary backup style is normally directly across the assertion continuum from the first backup style. In terms of assertiveness, secondary backup is the reversal of one's typical behavior. Let's look at that again. So we've just gone through the primary backup behaviors of each of our styles. So the expressives, they're even more expressive and more assertive. The drivers, they are even less responsive but even more assertive. And same with the analyticals and the amiables, they push further left of the assertive continuum than they would otherwise. This is where it gets really, really interesting when that stress is maintained for exceptionally long periods of time. When that stress continues and even becomes even more extreme. What happens is we move into our secondary style. We move on the opposite side. So an expressive who under stress would become more assertive and attack. When stuck in that state for a prolonged period of time, they acquiesce, which is similar to what the amiables will typically tend to do in normal situations and in situations of. So by acquiesce, we mean that they are effectively amiable. They're whatever. Yeah, no worries. Happy to. Yeah, that sounds fine. Yep, I'm just going to go with the flow. I don't care anymore. The drivers who are typically right, let's get things done, and under stress, right, that's it. We're getting things done. If they remain in that level, if they remain in backup style for too long a period of time, they'll move to that secondary backup, which is actually avoiding. They go, you know what, bugger it, I don't care. They do what the analyticals do in normal situations of stress. The amiables, they're so quiet, they're so happy to go with the flow, but when under too much stress for too long, they actually do what the expressives do and they attack. And that's actually very interesting because you'll get a large outburst which totally confuses most people because it's come from the amiable person who's normally the team player who goes along with the flow. All of a sudden they are yelling and they're angry. The analytical, who normally, one, stressed out, just avoids people problems, avoids assertion, when stuck in that space for too long, they become drivers basically. So let's go back to the picture. You flip on the assertive scale. So if I'm an expressive, if I'm in under stress, I become more assertive than otherwise. If that stress remains for too long, I bounce and I actually become effectively less assertive, or amiable is where I become. If I'm analytical and I remain in stress for too long and fall into my secondary backup, I'll effectively become similar to a driver. And a driver becomes similar to an analytical, and amiable becomes similar to an expressive, and expressive becomes similar to the amiables. I hope that makes sense. In some cases, the descriptions may not match your experience. As noted, everything that we've talked about in today's session is an approach to understanding people based on probabilities. Most people's behavior follows patterns described above. However, with backup behavior, as with everything else, exceptions do occur. Sometimes the exceptions are a response to one's environment. An expressive in a corporate environment may be less attacking than usual. A driver who grew up in a house where being autocratic was not allowed, their tendency might be to move directly into a secondary backup, which is actually avoiding. Remember, a backup style helps prevent stress from surging to levels that are dangerous to one's physical and emotional health. It's widely known that moderate levels of stress are beneficial. Too much can cause sickness or even death. Stress has been linked to most modern ailments, from headaches to heart attacks. Backup behavior is a protective device that helps alleviate dangerous levels of stress. Like a circuit breaker or in an electrical system, it protects against damage caused by excessive loads. So your backup style makes an important contribution to your own physical survival. When you find yourself being frustrated with someone's backup style, remember two things. One, that person is experiencing excessive stress. Two, the extreme, rigid, and frustrating behavior is a safety valve that helps protect that person from the ravages of dangerous levels of stress. Backup behavior often causes long-term damage to relationships. When you are in backup, what can you do? Damage control. Firstly, eliminate as much stress as you can. Do more stress reducing activities such as walking, jogging, swimming, listening to music, watching a sunset. Temporarily moderate or eliminate some stresses by cutting back on your schedule or avoiding some of the people or situations that trigger a great deal of stress in you. Change the way that you think about things. You can reduce stress by not only by changing the situation, but also changing your reaction to it. Secondly, limit the interpersonal damage that could be caused by your backup behavior. So reschedule meetings and appointments if possible. We're not suggesting to repress your feelings and to keep your stress bottled up inside. That's actually one of the worst things you can do. Instead, deal with your stress and your feelings, but in ways that won't damage your relationships. In other words, learn to dump your bucket of stress without filling up someone else's bucket. Finally, don't make decisions when you're in backup mode. If you do, you'll almost certainly come to regret it. People in backup often feel irrational pressure to make decisions or take action immediately. Making decisions based on abnormal pressures to avoid, acquiesce, dictate, or attack may relieve some pressure, but it's a very costly way of dealing with your stress. The purchase price of backup bias decisions is usually a long-lasting set of negative consequences. Remember, when other people are in backup style, remember, 1, expect that people won't always be at their best. 2, detect when another person's in backup. It's usually more obvious with the right of the liners, the more assertive styles. Here's some way that you can detect when somebody else is in backup. You may begin reacting negatively to that person. The other person's style-based behavior becomes more extreme or more rigid. In spending a lot of time with someone, you note specific behaviors that suggest when a person is in backup as well. Avoid getting hooked by the other person's backup behavior. Rather than focusing on your dislike of that backup behavior, realize what lies behind it. An enormous buildup of stress. Try and focus on relating and empathizing for the stress that person is trying to cope with. Don't try and prevent a person from using their backup behavior. Backup behavior is a way of relieving stress when its use is thwarted, the stress overload is prolonged. We don't always tell the expressive, so we always tell the expressive to stop shouting, the analytical to get it off your chest, and the driver to relax and take it easy. Finally, if possible, avoid doing business with a person who is in backup. Guys, that concludes part one of People Styles at Work. In this session, we've explored the 4 key different styles as identified by Dr. David Merrill through his work in social styles. You should have information now on what your style is, what some of the characteristics of your particular style are, and what you might do in backup in periods of high stress and prolonged stress. The next session is going to look at what we call style flexing. So the next session looks at how to handle and how to work with other styles. So what to do if you're an expressive, working with analyticals, how to work with an analytical. If you're an analytical, working with an expressive, how to work with an expressive. If you're an amiable and you want to work with a driver, how do you get along? And vice versa, if you're a driver that's trying to work with an amiable, how do you do that? So in the next session, we'll actually break down and give some more sort of pragmatic ways for students to actually apply some of the ideas that we've talked about here and do what we call style flexing. Really hope you've enjoyed today's first session. Please provide some feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts about today's session. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in part 2.